The two things that I value most in Indonesia is the safety and the tranquility. Dengan seluruh pengalaman, saya tidak ada rencana untuk kembali ke Amerika lagi. Saya mau tetap di Indonesia saja karena cukup memuaskan dalam segala hal.
Selamanya.
Yeah, till the day I die.
Ladies and gentlemen, this 70-year-old American is living his best retirement in Indonesia. Today, he will be sharing everything from how affordable Indonesia is, how different Indonesian values are to his personal life and past missionary work. Just enough to make you see Indonesia as your second home.
Please
All right.
tell us about yourself.
My name is Michael De Jager. I was born in Jakarta in 1955. My father is from Holland and my mother is from Jakarta. We went to Holland in 1957 and I grew up in Holland. When I was 20 years old, I came back to Indonesia as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Served in Indonesia from 75 to 77. And then I went to America because my parents immigrated to America. Lived in America for nearly 45 years, and 8 years ago I returned to Indonesia to retire here.
So you came first to Indonesia in 1975 and came back here 40 years later. What made you come back this time?
I worked very hard in America for nearly 50 years, and my retirement check was pretty small. And so in order for it to stretch a little bit further, I thought that if I came to Indonesia, the little bit of money that I had would go a lot further for expenses and stuff like that. And I wasn't disappointed.
Do you still remember how Indonesia was back then in 1975?
Oh, very much so, yes. Back then, there were hardly any cars or motorcycles. Everybody rode their bicycles. The air was still a lot cleaner because there wasn't all the vehicles. Nearly all families had 7 to 12 children. And now it's usually 2 to 3. So that was the other major difference. But other than that, you know, the people haven't changed much, the food hasn't changed much, and comparatively speaking, the prices kind of seem the same to me 50 years ago as it was now. So, yeah.
Can you compare how affordable is it to live in Indonesia?
Okay. All right, let me just give you 3 main examples. One, the rent. I am living in a house right now where I pay 1.5 juta a month in rent. About $110 a month. Now in America, right now, the cheapest place for like a 2-bedroom apartment is 20 juta a month or $2,000 a month. The other is the health insurance. I have BPJS insurance in Indonesia, which is, you know, about $10, $12 a month per person. In America, $600 a month. That and then the food is usually about a quarter to 1/5 the cost of anything. Any meal in America is 100,000 rupiah. And here, you know, you get a bakso or a soto ayam for 10,000, but in America, that would usually be about 100,000. So between those 3 things, I have a lot of extra money to spare, and that's why I do like to spend it with the little people that appreciate it more.
If you could summarize your whole experience in a few words, what would it be?
On my Facebook page, I said the 2 things that I value most in Indonesia is the safety and the tranquility. For me, not much stress about money, and I really feel a lot safer here than I ever did in America if I go somewhere that I'm not going to get mugged or robbed or stuff like that.
A lot of people, foreigners I interviewed, said that life in Indonesia seem to be much slower and happier. What do you say after 8 years here?
It amazes me how many people are able to live on 3.25 juta a month and, you know, have a few children and still be able to be happy. In America, that everybody would be miserable, depressed, and yet the Indonesian people seem to, you know, go with the flow, and I really admire that. And, you know, so I know that most people, everybody has a little side gig. Usually over a certain age, you can't even get a job anymore. Many, you know, banks or otherwise, if you're over 25, forget it, you're not hireable. So everybody is needing to come up with some kind of little business of their own, whether it's a little shop at their home or selling food or, babysitting for others or whatever. So yeah, I really admire that, and I feel sad that, the minimum wage is so small for so many people. And that's, where all these creative things, come up. So many people that I've known with bachelor's degrees that are Gojek drivers, and I just think, how sad, that you got your bachelor's degree from a university, but yet there is no job for you in your particular field. So those are some of the things that I feel for the people that, try to do everything right, and yet it's still a struggle with life.
You heard him right. Life in Indonesia is full of struggles. Anyway,
there are a lot of cities to choose from in Indonesia. Why did you decide to live in this laid-back city, Malang?
Okay, well, it helped that my wife is from Malang and she didn't want to move anywhere else. So that was one determining factor, although I really like Malang. But when I first arrived here 8 years ago, I traveled to many cities in Java, and I was really impressed with Magelang, just because that seemed like maybe 20 years, not as much progress as in Malang. It was not as developed, as busy, and in the end, I'm glad, because I come to this hotel where we're making this interview every day to go to a gym and swim, and who knows if Magelang had a 4-star hotel to do that. So
it feels like home here for
that's
you.
right. Yes, it does.
And how's your life here going? Your retirement?
Nearly everything that I do in my retirement is on a voluntary basis. I kind of act as a journalist for my church, where I attend events and take some pictures and write up a story. And so that's something that I spend my time on. And then I serve in various capacities in my church in leadership positions. And then I have a 4-year-old daughter who usually takes about 5 to 6 hours a day of my time, because I love being with her. So a little daughter in my old age keeps me young.
So you're still pretty much active in this later age?
Yes, correct. I am very blessed that even though I'm 70 years old, I'm on no medications. I'm strong because I exercise every day, and my daughter gets a lot of my attention and my time. So.
But how is the foreigner community here? Do you meet them a lot?
I really wasn't involved with any foreigners in Indonesia for 8 years, and then a person who was the administrator over an expat group in Malang, which consists of about 100 people from in Holland, Germany, Scotland, America. The person that had done it for the last maybe 15 years or so, he decided to retire and was looking for a new administrator for the expat group. And so I volunteered, and since then I've really gotten to know many of the expats that living here. Most of them are all in their 60s, 70s, 80s. They all lived in Indonesia between, let's say, 5 and 20 years. Nearly each one married to an Indonesian wife.
Your wife is Indonesian, her family is Indonesian, you have lived among the locals too. How do you define the Indonesian values?
Well, family seems to be value number one. Unity in thought and behavior seems to be also a very high priority. Anytime that there may become a division over religion or over politics, people don't want to have contention over those issues. Everybody just hopes that everybody can just get along and not rock the boat. And religion is a very big part of Indonesian life. The Muslims are very committed to, living a good life and doing what God wants them to do. And compared to America, where there's hardly religious values left among the majority, if you don't lock up everything, your motorcycle, your helmet, your belongings, if you don't watch it more maybe 5 or 10 minutes, it'll be gone. Some opportunity thief will take it. And in America, yes.
I think it's also the same here.
Well, I have not experienced that. I can leave my groceries on the motorcycle, my helmet, leave it unlocked, which was very difficult for me, to do initially. But, if you just live like a good man here, people will leave you alone. Right. The other thing is the whole gotong royong process here. America is an individualistic society where everybody out for their own. If you have a hungry family member, they don't really expect you to help out. If you do, that's wonderful, but it's not expected. Where in Indonesia, everybody tries to take care of each other. And that's a beautiful thing too.
You came to Indonesia in your later years. Do you ever wish you come sooner?
Now that you ask, yes. Back when I was in 1975, I was a good-looking young man. And so when we taught English classes, so many girls would flirt with us and would hope that we might marry them. And I think if back then, had I fallen in love with an Indonesian girl and stayed then, I think my whole life would have been a lot different. Now, I don't know back then if you were a foreigner in Indonesia with getting a job, in 1975, if I would need to be selling bakso, on the street. And I guess I could always have taught English. That's, everybody wants the foreigners to teach English. Anyway, so my life would have been completely different had I come back to Indonesia sooner. And I think my life would have been less challenging.
This is a hypothetical question. You said you wanted to come to Indonesia sooner when you were much younger.
Yeah.
If you had to be a tukang bakso, would that be okay for you?
Well, it seems like whenever I talk to bakso sellers, I say, how long have you been doing this? And they say 20 years, 25 years. So there must be something that it sells okay, that they can make a living off it, so.
So yes?
Yes, so yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Now let's move on. Let's go back to your missionary work. Was it challenging for you to do the missionary work?
Okay, it's interesting that in 1975, there were still very few foreigners in Indonesia. And so as foreign missionaries, when we would go into a kampong or something like that, we were a novelty that everybody wanted us to come into their home and meet the family and stuff like that. So we experienced a lot more hospitality by the people because they didn't really understand what we were doing as missionaries. And so it was just, I have a boule in my home, that is an honor. And, but, since then, it's not a big deal anymore. And people are a little bit more hesitant to, want to listen to a Christian message. And so they're still friendly, but not as maybe receptive to new ideas as it was back then. So,
do you mind to share how is it going in Indonesia? Its development or anything?
Okay. The church started in Indonesia in 1969. That's when the first missionaries came, and now, nearly 55 years later, we have about 7,000 members in Indonesia, in about 10 different cities. Now, in the same time that the church started in Indonesia, it started in the Philippines. Right now, the Philippines has 750,000 members. So there is something about Indonesia and accepting the Christian religion that compared to the Philippines in the same time period, that it's nearly 1,000 times more converts. But, I understand that, that's just because of the Islam devotion to their religion. And that's fine, but that's just, when you compare the Philippines and Indonesia, that's one of the big differences.
Do you know which city in Indonesia is the most progressed about the church?
Yes, Surakarta.
Solo.
Yeah, Solo. It has... Even in 1975, it was the most desirable city for missionaries to go to, and it has never changed in 55 years. It has 4 church units of about 100 each, and there's no other city in Java except Jakarta. They also have 4 units, but they're fairly spread apart, and there's one English-speaking church unit in Jakarta for those that don't speak Indonesian. So that's kind of how things go. So the members of the church here in Indonesia are faithful, but missionary work is just very slow. So we just accept that.
Can I ask your opinion about the religion diversity in Indonesia? How do you see it?
Well, it seems like overall, all religions are respected to do what they want to do, but just not try to convert other people to their religion. I think that's really, because of this, we seek for harmony. And especially if one member in a family becomes a member of another church, then that just creates friction and disharmony in the family. So that's why everybody just hopes that we all just get along and just stay in your own lane, as the Americans say it. So to keep the peace for everyone.
We've been talking a lot about the strong points of Indonesia.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask your opinion on something more negative. What's something negative or the reality people should expect about Indonesia?
Well, I think only two things. The corruption. I think if everybody was honest, there would be a lot more money to go around for everybody. But, that's really many countries, in Africa too, and that all the people would be better off if all the politicians were honest and that money would go where it should go. So I really shouldn't single this out as Indonesia, because really it's, a problem in many other countries. And, when I heard about BPJS that, so many milliards were stolen from BPJS by people, and you just think, how many more people could have been helped with their health, had that not happened. So, but that's, sometimes the weakness of a few people that, make that happen. So.
You said two things, corruption and what's the second one?
Enforcement of the laws. Indonesia seems to be pretty good where it comes to traffic laws, that very little is enforced. People, don't drive with their lights on their motorcycles, which is a little dangerous. Yeah. But the police hardly ever stop them, or 5 people on a motorcycle. But if something does happen and you need the police's help, they do expect a little uang rokok. And so in America, that would be considered a bribe if you even tried to give a policeman some money. But here in Indonesia, not all policemen, but, if you want something done, they do expect you to help them out a little bit to serve you better.
Last question. What's something you have realized about Indonesia?
I think one of the reasons why Indonesia isn't as attractive to expats to retire to is the language barrier. If you do not speak Indonesian or are willing to learn it, unless you live in Bali or Jakarta, it's going to be very difficult to integrate, to go shopping, whatever, because the majority of the people are not fluent enough in English to just serve any foreigner that, wants to be served. And so that's why I consider it a great advantage to speak the language and, be able to interact with people.
Any message for Indonesians? In Indonesian, please.
Okay. Well, just tetap melakukan apa yang Anda lakukan. Hampir semuanya baik dengan pengalaman saya di sini. So, semoga itu tetap berjalan lancar. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih banyak, Pak Michael.
Okay, well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the more in-depth approach of this video. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts below.
That was a great conversation.
Okay.
You made a lot of contributions.
Okay,
for the channel.
Alrighty, well, great. Thank you.
Of Diplomat Channel.